right there changing my voice. So I first have to point out that I go beyond everyone else who's ever lived because they have done things in a way that have caused me to feel the need to highlight that. You know, a bunch of racist white Jews and LGBT people who have some kind of genetic problems, biological dysfunction when it comes to cognition, and it makes them kind of odd, what have you. That's where frats come from, really, these odd people, right? These European royals, they're inbred, what have you. They think if they mess up my brain to make it so I seem more like them, that they get something from it, and they're doing something funny in that regard. And I'm sure you all see it with the way people look these days. Okay, that kind of trance-like look in their eyes, it has to do with trying to change the way people look and controlling their minds and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is part 2. Point C. It is not good to fight someone toe-to-toe. People may die or suffer cognitive impairment or crippling when they engage in a fist fight or an MMA-style fight, what have you. One should only fight toe-to-toe in a way that does not cripple or kill someone when it's logical. And obviously, if the fight is more serious, then, you can cripple or kill them, right? Pretty straightforward. It is not a sound way, fighting toe-to-toe is not a sound way to solve conflicts, and it often creates other problems. Point D. And since they interrupted me, I'm going to point out that obviously it's not good to be in a Western quote-unquote war spirit or fighting spirit ever. Point D. The general rule of thumb is that if something is really worth fighting for, it is worth killing for. Certainly that is part of why even the authors of the Bible who sought to confuse their readers did not mention any key characters getting into fist fights, right? When Moses killed the Egyptian, right, it was more than a fist fight. He killed the Egyptian. Okay, so that's the general rule of thumb. If something is really worth fighting for, it is worth killing for. Okay, I can tell by the pattern of harassment that the interruptions that occurred were not a coincidence. I'm going to have to remove some clips. I went over Point E already, and I pronounced judgments against America, etc. I pronounce them again, and I pronounced them before already. The reason why is that they are denying me my human rights, and they're persecuting me, and they're making it so I can't make videos in my car because I'm being filmed, in my room, being filmed outside while they're making noises. I don't respect them and their war spirit at all. I don't respect their military or martial arts systems or their police. Same with Europe and Israel, because of how they have been treating me for white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacy. You can't be a massive nation with a massive intelligence apparatus that's aware that Christ is back and does nothing when people are sabotaging him to try to make your group seem superior for the purpose of greed and sexual control. Okay, I'm sure we can all agree that it's not racist to point out that there must be spiritual consequences for what they're doing. Go over Point E again, and again, there's going to have to be serious consequences on the spirits. Again, the spirits, which matters more than the flesh, of the nations that are persecuting me, which is all the nations of the world led by Israel, Europe, and the West. But let's go over E again. Say someone grabs your girlfriend or your wife's rear end. This can be quite a dilemma. One might think to themselves, maybe the person knows that it is their wife. Maybe the person doesn't need to know. The people who think that the answer is to confront them if they are not as tough or as good as a fighter as the person they're confronting, right? And to demand that they apologize anyway, have come close to the right idea. But it is not that simple. One must use tact and timing and pinpoint the wise response based on the situation. What is the most logical assumption? One must put universal pinpoint and moral precision first. In that situation, one might have to fight them, and that is fair enough. However, what if the person is tougher than you are, or you are a martial artist who would sustain some damage unless you strike them in a crippling or deadly way first? In all situations, one must do a thorough assessment if they have the time to. Also, they may have the option to make a video that their employers wouldn't hold against them on the internet. This helps one come to terms with the situation and can help one process it and review it. They also have the option to not release the video and to make sure it is not too controversial for good measure. They should explain why they did not fight them or kill them. One can launch a high-level attack on the person and the culture that is responsible if that is moral to do. To jump to the conclusion that a reckless, emotional, and violent response is the move simply is not worth it, and one can take more precautions next time, etc. One can ask their friends what they think. Almost certainly they should not jump them. This could lead to serious injury or death, and it is best to handle things by themselves if they can. One should not let their ego or their desire to be tough get in their way of making, they shouldn't let it get in the way of making a wise and insightful choice, which always comes with a refined sense of things, unless one makes the wise choice on a fluke. Point number F. One way people often fail in life is they do not understand precisely when to kill and why. One should go through life ready to martyr themselves for what is right, and if they are married, their wife should be willing to do the same. She should not remarry. This is something that people don't understand. They don't understand that the right thing to do is be ready to die for what's right on the drop of a hat. Okay? They also don't understand that to just say to turn the other cheek is an oversimplification. In the Old Testament, there's all kinds of wars being fought. In Judges 3, God trained the Israelites in the story in warfare, right? He left the other nations around him specifically to train them in warfare, right? Life is an obstacle course. Your adversaries are part of the obstacle course. The Bible talks about snares and traps and obstacles and stumbling blocks. When Christ tells to Peter in one of the Gospels, which has to be compared to the other Gospels to truly understand what is being said, okay, he says that those who live by the sword die by the sword. However, in another version, he says, what are you doing, right? You're trying to stop him from drinking the cup that the Father set aside for him. In other words, that he's interfering with the process of Christ being crucified, again, in the story. You shouldn't just let yourself be killed unless it is the precise and wise thing to do. So he wasn't saying that, hey, you can't ever pick up the sword. He's saying that you shouldn't pick up the sword and rely on the flesh, because the spirit and the cause and the formation in the spirit at the time was to allow him to be crucified. However, it is just a story based on something else. So that leads us to point G. One of the main mistakes people make is they look at things in terms of the flesh and the earth and not in terms of the divine. They must overcome the desire to be diplomatic to the white, Jewish, and LGBT systems that dominate the planet in that worldly way that they do. Even in the Bible, the prophets spend a lot of time chastising the Jews, what have you. Isaiah 1, for example, Jeremiah 8, okay. They did this even though the Bible was made in a way to confuse people on purpose, and it says so in Isaiah and Jeremiah. Again, in Jeremiah 8, it not only chastises, he's not only chastising the Jews, he's saying that the lying pen of the scribes handles scripture falsely. And the people who compiled the Torah were the masses of the Jews who were doing the wrong thing, not the small group of Jews who in the story were doing the right thing. So what does that tell you? Same thing with the Bible. Bottom line is, if it's universally true, it's true. If it's not, it's not, right? Luke 12:57, one of my favorite scriptures. Why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? Also Matthew 7, I believe it is, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay. They did this even though the Bible was made in a way to confuse people on purpose, and it even says so in Isaiah and Jeremiah. You see, the white, Jewish, and LGBT systems were all so off that they even taught people to persecute me, the Son of God. So their systems were so off that when they were dominating, America, for example, right now, right, in that worldly way, they taught the masses of people to persecute me instead of obey God through me. And that is way, way, way off. And the reasons are very selfish. Okay, so when we're looking at things in terms of cultural systems, right, you say, how do you respond? Do you respond the way that the white man would respond? Or any Jew you ever heard of? Or any LGBT person? No. The response is a Royal African Falcon martial arts response. That is the wise response. In other words, because let's look in terms of trying to talk to a female. If you approached a female like a Jewish person in fraternity, right? And she's the most gorgeous female, she's very sensitive, she is very stylish, okay? Do you expect the wise response to be there? No. Like, it's not going to be there no matter what. If you responded to, if you approached her like Donald Trump or some rich white guy in a suit, is it going to be the no. If you approached her like an LGBT, no. You see what I'm saying? And so it is with the Marshall. Marshall is marital scramble, okay? So it's so bad that even if I approached the ideal woman, okay, in rags, in my car covered in dirt, the shoes dirty as can be, thrown way off, my ability to explain to her that I'm Christ with my Royal African Falcon martial art argument would go beyond everybody in white, Jewish, LGBT culture and every other culture. You see, it's a matter of principle. It's a matter of wisdom proven logically, through lifestyle, through action. It's a matter of, cultural system, the highest cause, the highest path. She would have to be a dumbass to choose someone else over me, just a complete useless slut. It's straightforward. So point number 8. If a significantly bigger person is throwing blows at a smaller person, it is fair for them to stab them. If they have a gun, they must try not to kill them unless it is too risky, then they may kill them. In other words, if you're good at shooting somebody in the leg or something, and you have a gun and somebody's bigger guy starts taking off on you, that's what you do. But if there's a good chance that that's just going to make him kill you and not just beat you up, for example, you should smoke him. Okay? Or he's going to cause you serious bodily injury. However, one must live the highest cause in the Royal African Falcon top martial arts order, regardless of their race, or they're doing the wrong thing. So in other words, let's look at this in terms of a quick story here. Put this in terms of a quick story here. Say that there was, a white guy from the hood who was a big guy under mind control. And there was a privileged token minority. I'm putting it this way so I'm not racist, what have you. Okay? And that privileged token minority was not in the Royal African Falcon martial art order. I mean, the description of the person kind of gives it away, right? And that white person starts trying to take off on him. He's much bigger than him, right? And he's always going to knock him out, put him in a coma, could kill him, what have you. And the token minority pulls out a gun and kills him. In the eyes of the law, the worldly law, the law of the world, right, which is heavily flawed to say the least, that's fair enough, okay? If he was in the divine order, it would be fair, but because he's living for what's immoral, what is rebellion against God, for what is selfish, etc. He's just a selfish asshole who took out another selfish asshole. So the simplest answer is it's still considered murder, okay? Things get a little confusing. In my martial art code, I said, I allow people to resist against the state without it getting held against them, right? Okay, after my flesh dies, for example, outside the divine order, because the state is so evil. But in that case, it's just a victim of the state, right, under mind control. So that would be held against them is the simple answer. Now it takes a thorough analysis to make sure that that's correct, but that's about right. Okay. So again, this cannot be done after my flesh dies. This is one of many reasons people should not have children no matter what. So they cannot be in the Royal African Falcon martial art order after my flesh dies, basically. And no one should reproduce no matter what, period. There are all sorts of people who are clearly off. There are governing class types, many of whom cannot fight very well, and they want to confuse people about what is fair, just, and right to try to elevate scum in the minds of people who are foolish enough to be fooled. There are big knuckleheads that try to throw their weight around and have their way. There are also big guys who think that because they uphold the white man's standard or token minority standard, and they aren't as obvious of a brute as the previous type, that they have a solid code, which is not true, obviously. There are greedy idiots that try to unfairly benefit from a society that sabotages people that are different from them. Many of them try to be handsome or pretty, and they are found in all races these days. There are people who would and will attack and kill for a corrupt state, including law enforcement, etc. There are people who are poorly bred enough to try to tell me what to do and say and what not to say. Those people are among the least spiritually powerful. Beware of all these people and people who try to control all martial arts systems for the purpose of social engineering, with an emphasis on controlling who dates who. Now, really quickly, before I wrap up this part 2, I want to bring up that if you're outside the divine order, the simple answer is you don't have spiritual power. Okay, so it's a semantics. It's kind of semantics. So they're when I said they're the least spiritually powerful, they're the furthest from being spiritually powerful. Everyone outside the divine order, the simple answer is they have no spiritual power.